Few people look at a bright red lobster and think of international politics. Yet, this humble crustacean became an unexpected pawn in a global trade war. For decades, Maine's cold waters were the kingdom of the American lobster. But a series of international events would soon pit neighbor against neighbor, turning the tide in favor of Canada. The conflict began quietly, not with cannons, but with signatures on paper. While the US focused on tariffs and trade disputes, Canada was busy making friends, securing landmark trade agreements with Europe and Asia. Maine lobstermen, confident in their dominance, didn't see the threat coming. That changed when the US entered a trade war with China. In retaliation, China slapped a 25% tariff on US lobsters. Suddenly, Maine's biggest market became prohibitively expensive, and Chinese buyers turned to Canada. Canadian lobsters, biologically identical, faced no tariffs. The door to China slammed shut for Maine but swung wide open for Canada. The trade war handed Canada a golden opportunity, transforming the industry overnight. Maine's lobstermen faced plummeting prices and rising costs, while their Canadian counterparts thrived. The lobster, once a symbol of prosperity, became a symbol of vulnerability in a world of unpredictable global trade. The battlefield was set, and the prize was control of a billion-dollar industry. The numbers reveal the dramatic impact of the trade war. In 2017, Maine landed over 110 million pounds of lobster, valued at more than $430 million, with China as a key buyer. U.S. lobster exports to China had grown by over 400% in the years before the tariffs. But when China imposed a 25% tariff in 2018, U.S. exports to China plummeted by over 80%. A $128 million market for American exporters virtually vanished overnight. Meanwhile, Canadian lobster exports to China surged by nearly 50% in the same period. Canadian businesses invested in new processing plants and live-holding facilities to meet Asian demand. Airports in Halifax became hubs for cargo planes filled with live lobsters bound for Shanghai and Beijing. The value of Canada's lobster exports jumped from $2.2 billion to over $2.6 billion in just a couple of years. The trade war rerouted the entire lobster trade through Canada, creating jobs and prosperity there. Back in Maine, dock prices became volatile and often depressed, even as catch volumes stayed high. Lobstermen worked harder for less, and the economic pain rippled through the supply chain. The statistics were clear. The trade war cost Maine tens of millions in lost revenue and handed Canada a massive, possibly permanent, advantage. The global supply chain had been fundamentally restructured. The numbers told a story of winners and losers, divided by a border but fishing the same sea. Canada's lobster boom wasn't just luck, it was strategy. Two key trade deals, CETA with the EU and CPTPP with Pacific Rim countries, gave Canada a powerful edge. CETA eliminated the EU's 8% tariff on live lobsters, giving Canadian exporters a price advantage over Americans. Canadian lobster exports to the EU soared by more than 50% after the deal. Meanwhile, the US withdrew from the CPTPP, leaving Canadian producers with tariff-free access to Asia. American lobstermen faced barriers in both Europe and Asia, while Canadians enjoyed a global network of preferential trade. This was no accident, it was the result of deliberate Canadian policy to diversify trade and secure long-term advantages. The lobster coup was years in the making, coming to fruition at the perfect moment. Canada's golden handshake was built on smart diplomacy and patient negotiation. Beyond the numbers, the trade war hit Maine's coastal communities hard. Lobstering is more than a job, it's a way of life, passed down through generations. The sudden drop in prices left families struggling to make ends meet, with high costs and shrinking profits. Many fishermen worked longer hours just to break even, while young people reconsidered their future in the industry. The stress was palpable, as families worried about mortgages and their children's futures. The pain rippled through local economies. Bait suppliers, boat repair shops, and restaurants all felt the pinch. Many in Maine felt abandoned by their government, watching Canadian neighbors thrive while they struggled. The trade war threatened not just livelihoods but a cherished tradition and sense of independence. Lobstermen felt like pawns in a larger game, their fate tied to distant political decisions. The empty traps symbolized more than lost income, they represented a threat to Maine's coastal identity. The human cost was real, and the scars may last for generations. The trade war was fought on spreadsheets, but its casualties were families and communities. As Maine's crisis deepened, Washington scrambled to respond. The government offered financial aid, buying surplus lobster to prop up prices. A temporary fix at best. Politicians promised to resolve trade disputes and level the playing field, but the Chinese market remained out of reach. A mini-deal with the EU eliminated tariffs on American lobsters, reopening a key market, but it couldn't replace China. Meanwhile, new environmental regulations aimed at protecting endangered whales added costs and headaches for lobstermen. One part of the government gave aid, another imposed new expenses, a frustrating paradox. The industry felt whipsawed by conflicting policies and hollow promises. Without a long-term solution, uncertainty reigned. The patchwork response left Maine's lobster industry struggling to plan for the future. While Maine struggled, Canada doubled down on its advantage. The Canadian industry branded its lobster as premium and eco-friendly, certified by the Marine Stewardship Council. This green branding appealed to buyers in Europe and beyond, justifying higher prices. Canada invested in marketing, infrastructure, and logistics, building new processing plants and upgrading airports for lobster exports. The government provided funding to expand capacity and ensure reliable delivery worldwide. Canadian diplomats worked to defend and expand market access, knowing their success depended on favorable trade deals. This proactive approach combined smart branding, investment, and diplomacy. Canada wasn't just taking advantage of a temporary situation, it was executing a long-term plan. The result? Canada became the world's leading lobster exporter. The trade war sparked a battle of subsidies on both sides of the border. In the US, aid came as direct payments and government buybacks, lifelines for struggling fishermen, but only a short-term fix. Critics called it a trade-distorting crutch that didn't address lost markets or long-term stability. In Canada, support focused on long-term investment, grants and loans for new technology, processing, and sustainability. The Atlantic Fisheries Fund poured hundreds of millions into innovation and growth. US aid was reactive, Canada's was proactive, building a competitive advantage for the future. The difference revealed two philosophies: survival versus strategic growth. Subsidies kept both industries afloat, but only one was sailing ahead. The lobster trade war didn't just disrupt, it permanently reshaped the global market. Canada's new trade routes and business relationships are now deeply entrenched. Buyers in China and Europe have grown accustomed to Canadian suppliers and logistics. Maine can't simply reclaim lost ground by removing tariffs. Trust and habits have shifted. The industry is now diversifying, seeking new markets and focusing on value-added products to reduce dependence on live exports. For Canada, the challenge is to maintain its lead through sustainability, innovation, and careful resource management. The border, once just a line on a map, is now a hard economic divide. The story of the lobster coup is a lesson in how global politics can reshape local lives. For Maine, the future means rebuilding and adapting. For Canada, it's about defending and expanding its dominance. The lobster on your plate is more than a meal, it's a symbol of a world transformed by trade. The tides have shifted, and the industry will never be the same.